Yeah, so we're good. Um, so thanks for joining in. And this is our first try at doing a Zoom class. The first two was on video, and that was a learning experience. I had to learn how to do that from scratch. That's why the first week I was using pieces of paper before the screen. But then the second one, I actually got a piece of software that allowed me to integrate the slides into the document. So this is the third version that we're trying. We'll see which one people like the best, and then that's the one we'll stick with. And hopefully, we won't have to do this too much longer. But right now, it seems that we're going to do it for at least a month. Nobody seems to be willing to go less than a month. So I hope everybody's doing well. John, you doing good? All right. So I want to begin by reading Psalm 49. I read this the other morning and I thought it was quite appropriate to the situation we are in. And it says, "Hear this, all peoples, give ear, all inhabitants of the world, both low and high, rich and poor together. My mouth shall speak wisdom, and the meditation of my heart shall give understanding. I will incline my ear to the proverb, and I will disclose my dark sayings on the harp. Why should I fear in the days of evil, when the iniquity at my heels surround me? Those who trust in their wealth and boast in the multitude of their riches, none of them can by any means redeem his brother, nor give to God a ransom for him. For the redemption of their souls is costly, and it shall cease forever, that he should continue to live eternally and not see the pit. For he sees wise men die, likewise the fool and the senseless person perish, and leave their wealth to others. Their inner thought is that their houses will last forever, their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. Nevertheless, though in honor, do not remain. He is like the beast that will perish." I thought that was interesting because, where you have something like this going on, it's not a respecter of persons, right? You see, in rich and poor, black and white, no matter who it is, are susceptible. We thought it was at first the older people, but now you're seeing younger people as well, susceptible. And it just reminds us that none of us can buy our way out of death. That's what the scripture says. None of them can by any means redeem his brother, nor give to God a ransom for him, for the redemption of their souls is costly, and it shall cease forever, that they shall continue to live eternally and not see the pit. So it sounds gory, and he said that in his fourth verse, "I will disclose my dark sayings on the harp." But it's also true, right? And I think one of the things in life right now is, I don't know about you, but it's helping me, and I think lots of people, to realize the value of life. And a lot of things that we took for granted, like getting in your car and going for a drive, or going to a movie, or playing with your kids, or seeing your parents in the nursing home. I have a friend who is an employee, associate, whose wife is pregnant, and my daughter-in-law is pregnant, and they've both been told that if they're going to labor, and Russell's wife, Amy, is pregnant, if they're going to labor or even false labor, once they come to the hospital, they cannot leave and return again. Neither her nor the husband. Anyone who leaves cannot return. Right? So think about that. You would never perceive that a hospital would tell a pregnant woman and her husband that one of them can't return for the birth of that baby. But that's the days that we're in. Any comments? Or is that too grim for the start of the class?
No, I think that was good. I like that. It's something to ponder is why I think there's not a lot of comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. It's something to settle in. You know, Josh came down with a cold yesterday in the afternoon. I started maybe feeling it today. And, you know, is it a cold or not? I don't know. We're, you know, probably 4 days from knowing.
Right.
And I've never caught cold and thought, well, is this going to be a thing that could kill me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just never been part of the process.
Yeah.
As your friend for 12 years, the answer is no, John. You are not. You're just simply not allowed to die. So,
well, I don't have any plans.
Do whatever you want with that.
Yeah. You know, but it's a serious thought. I mean, that you know, I have allergies every year, but I have the allergies all year, but they get worse in the springtime and stuff. And I get runny nose and stuff like that. And sometimes I get what feels like a mild fever sometimes. And that's happened a couple of times. And I'm like, okay, do I need to watch myself? You know, to me, I got a sore throat one day. We slept in separate rooms for 3 nights. All these are unusual things that we probably never have thought about doing. Well, if you're married, you probably thought about sleeping in the other room before. But okay. So where do you guys want to start? Do you want to start like with Galatia, where we were before? Do you want to press on? Do you want to talk about these 6 cultural things? I know Michelle said she had some interesting thoughts she wanted to share.
I don't know if they were really worth sharing, but I was thinking about the bartering system versus systems of reciprocity when you were going over capitalism versus socialism. And I was thinking about how one of the things that we talked about a lot in anthropology is when you go into a culture and you don't understand how a system of reciprocity works, you're only accustomed to a bartering system. And so if you go somewhere and you're accustomed to the bartering system, you know, is what we're used to, getting the most for the least. You pay the smallest amount possible to get the most that you can. And we're all that way. We all look for a good sale, and the stores aren't feeling like we're getting one over on them. They design sales and stuff like that on purpose, and you haggle for the cheapest price. None of that's not like weird or bad necessarily, but if you go somewhere that functions off a system of reciprocity, so like a balanced reciprocity system where somebody gives you something and you would just automatically give something to them of equal value, and it's not a payment, it's like more like a trade or a way to keep things equal and keep the peace. And some of the examples that I was thinking of were Malinowski when he went to the Trobriand Islands, and there's the Kula ring. Have you guys heard of that at all? So among the Trobriand Islands, they're tribes on like every island, and they stay in peace with one another, and in their trading and their in their goods and stuff like that, because they have something called the Kula ring, where there's bracelets and necklaces of really high value, and every time this island goes and takes goods to the next island down, they bring this white necklace with them, and it's given to that next tribe. It's like, here is my offering to you along with these goods that I'm going to take. And it goes so on and so forth, and they continue passing these necklaces, while in the other direction, as they're sending and taking goods from the other islands, there's red bracelets that go around. And because they're of such high value, as you continue to trade, there's an understanding of equal partnership in everything that you're doing. So if you're say going to go do a work and witness thing at some place in some community that, I mean, realistically in the year 2020, it doesn't matter where you go, everybody has a bartering system. But if you go to a culture where people traditionally have used balanced reciprocity, where you're gifting, and you show up, you could accidentally offend somebody by trying to haggle
Mm-hmm.
when it just not, and not trying to cheapen what's being offered at all, but you're
Mm-hmm.
just not used to it.
Right.
Or you bring a gift and you give them a gift that is so nice and
Mm-hmm.
so expensive, and they can't possibly offer it back to you. Then you're basically saying, I'm better than you and you can't ever equal my gift, therefore I can always lord that over you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of an offense. You can offend them by accidentally over gifting, if that makes sense. So I just thought, is that maybe that came out really complicated. In my mind, it made a lot of sense. But
No, I think it makes sense. If you travel internationally, you run into that, right? Because like if you go to places like India, Bangladesh, and places like that, they expect you to barter over everything. They don't expect you to pay the price that they ask. Or even in Indonesia, when we were in Bali last November, and they expect you to barter when they tell you a price, and it's amazing how far sometimes down you can get them to come, right? Whereas people who aren't accustomed to that, they go into that community and the person says, give me 1,000 taka, and they're like, okay, and just pull it out and hand it to the person, and the person is just looking at them, okay, so it goes both ways.
mm-hmm.
And I was reading some stuff a few years ago that the bartering system is actually regaining some popularity in the United States among some people. There's actually these communities you can join now that is based on bartering, right?
Even everything that we do online now is here's my price or best offer.
Right.
Or, even it's basically what eBay is based off of.
Right.
I'm just trying to get it for the cheapest that I possibly can.
That's all of eBay is based on. Right?
Yeah.
That's the
right.
concept behind eBay. And Facebook. What's the Facebook marketplace, I think it is?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
They all based on that system of bartering. I had a friend. I think that people say stories tell 1,000 words. I like to tell stories. I had a friend whose dad died. She was Greek, and her parents owned a restaurant. And they'd closed down the restaurant for many years, and they had this old piece of oven that they kept, and they just kept it in a shed, right? A whole bunch of restaurant stuff they wouldn't get rid of, and they wouldn't let her get rid of it. It was in the garage at his house, so she would always go over there like, "Why do you get rid of this junk? Throw out this stuff." And they'd be like, "No, no, no." So then he died, and her mom died, so they're cleaning out the garage. And her brother says, "Why don't we put this stuff on eBay and see how much money we can get?" They got $10,000 for the oven. It was like a world-class oven-fired, original Greek wood-fired pizza oven.
Jeez.
And she was like, "We were on our way to take it to the junkyard."
Like Antique Roadshow.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
There you go.
You have a comment, Gary? Oh, that was a clap. That was applause. Okay. So you never know, right? So one of the things that I want us to think about before we go into this, and I guess I can end with it, is, you know, as you look at the Bible, to begin to see culture in the Bible, right? And it doesn't always have to be controversial. So, you know, like Galatia, when we were talking about Galatia, you know, we look at where it is. It was a region, right? And then Antioch was over here where they were first called Christians. But this portion right up here is where it crosses into Turkey. And then you can see over here where the Spice Trail and those other trails were.
Hey, Grantley, we can't see the map, or at least I can't. I've just got the 6 cultural systems thing up.
Oh,
Yeah.
it didn't change?
No.
Did it change there?
Nope.
Oh, okay. That's weird.
Well, so there's a little bit of a trick on Zoom, and of course I can't see what you're doing on exactly on your screen. But if you pick if it's got screen numbers 1 and 2, that should give you the whole screen. Otherwise, it's giving you just that one application window, and it'll follow that window around no matter where you put it.
So what's the best way to do that?
So you stop sharing, and then
Okay.
you do share screen again, and you look for when you say share screen, it should show you in that big box with a whole bunch of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
2 of them will have numbers on it if you've got 2 screens, 2
Right.
monitors.
Yeah.
And pick one of them, and it doesn't matter which one you pick, and then you drag other applications on top of that, you know, into that monitor, and we should be able to see them. I spend hours a day on doing Zoom meetings. It's how my whole company runs.
So pick one screen.
Yeah, pick one of the screens, not one of the applications. So either the number 1 or the number 2, and then hit your share button again to share that screen, and then we'll all be able to see that. So that looks like the 6 cultural systems to me. And then if you pull a window across, there we go. So now I see the blue economic systems. Yeah. And now I see the map.
Okay. Thank you. See, I learned something new. See, so then you'll see Galatia here where it crosses into Turkey, and you'll see over here where it does. But you see that it is on a route. You see all of these places here: Ephesus, Troas, Pygaria. All of these are mentioned in the book of Acts. But Galatia was in a major crossroad. If you look at the map coming across here, so they had a lot of cultural influences. And if you read the history of it, this region became a really important trade route, right? And a part of the Roman road. I forgot the name of the road that they named it. So you could see how a lot of cultural influences was affecting the church at Galatia. So Galatia is a region, Antioch and Tarsus and all these are part of, you see it, here's Galatia. You can see those. So if you think about it, and then you go back and you read the book of Galatians, I don't know if it did anything for you, but it helped me to see why Paul was talking about some of the things he was talking about, right? Because it has some really strong Greek, I mean, not Greek, but really strong Roman and other cultural influences. The next book that we're going to look at is going to be, we're going to be crossing over into Greece, right? When the church crosses over into Greece. And then you begin to see now not only Greek culture, but Roman culture and other cultures coming in. So when you read that, when you read the book, the Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, which was a major city in Greece, you can begin to see how some of those things are coming in there, right? So I hope this class is helping you when you read the Bible now to begin to think about, okay, why are they talking about these things, right? He wasn't just doing it because, you know, he was a preacher and he had to have 3 points for a sermon. He was addressing particular issues in the church. And most of those issues were a mixture of religious issues and cultural issues, because the cultural issues kept creeping into the church and keeping out of the church. Okay. So we were talking about economic systems. I don't want to go back through all of this, but Michelle talked about this. Anybody else has any other comments on capitalism versus socialism?
I think the only observation I'd make here is that sometime in the last 6 months or so, I read a really interesting passage from the writings of Abraham Lincoln describing how he saw capitalism, which was essentially from how he was raised before he went off and became a lawyer in trades. So he said, you learn a trade, so you go apprentice yourself to someone and you become a journeyman, and you go around and you hire yourself out to somebody, and you do the work, and you put away your money and you put away your money, and eventually you open your own place and you hire people. And for him, that was as far as it went. This corporation thing we have was I think he'd have found that kind of silly and unnerving. And I think even some of the big ventures of the day he would have thought of in the same way. He saw it as, and he would have said the same thing, I think, about a lawyer. Well, you pay your bills, you start working, you do better, you hire people. Eventually those people go out and start their own thing. Very different thing than 20th, 21st century capitalism.
Right. So it's more like small business, right? Compared to
exactly. He saw the small
corporation.
business end of it. A person starts something and hires a few people, but the idea of having hundreds, let alone thousands or tens of thousands of people, didn't enter in, as far as you could tell from what he said, from that passage, didn't really enter into his concept at all.
Right.
And certainly in that concept, I think you have to work pretty hard to make a good argument against it. You might not have to work as hard to find good arguments against what we have today. But for that, so that's about all I have without trying to get into your note did say be careful.
Yeah. So, socialism, a lot of people in the United States have a adverse reaction to socialism, but there are lots of social programs even within our capitalist system, right?
Sure.
And the most capitalist country that I have ever visited is Hong Kong, not the United States. Hong Kong is more capitalist, and it's a Chinese country, than anything we have here. Right?
Oh, sure.
So when I was in Hong Kong, they shared a statistic with us that 1 in every 35 Hong Kong residents was a millionaire. We don't come close to that in the United States.
No.
Okay. Go ahead, Gary. You're muted. I'll unmute you. Wait.
I had two thoughts. You mentioned Hong Kong, 1 in 35 of them are millionaires. I think anybody that owns property in Hong Kong is probably a millionaire. And then I like that you said we should be careful to argue which one is better than the other. There are some people assume good on the part of socialism or beneficence and stinginess or selfishness on the part of capitalism. Those aren't necessarily true, and most systems aren't a pure socialist or pure capitalist.
Right.
So they're sort of a combination of those. And you can be capitalist and still have beneficial proletariat, people taking care of others. It is not all self-centered or profit motivated.
Right. So have you guys ever heard about social democracy, a social democracy? Right. A lot of countries in the world are social democracies, right? They're capitalist in a sense, but they have lots of social programs.
Most of Europe could be described that way.
Yeah.
Germany certainly has a strong sense of social responsibility, social programs, and you're not going to really find a more capitalist country than Germany either.
Right.
in terms of how business is done, right?
Right.
But there's this sense that these services should be provided to citizens. And when you want to shock about how capitalism, I mean, serious hardcore private business, big business capitalism can run, ask any European and a German, since I mentioned that, how many weeks a year off they get on for vacation.
Yeah.
I mean, they feel sorry for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So it can all fit together, absolutely.
That is true. So the next one was marriage and family systems. We could spend 3 weeks on this one topic. This is, in fact, David Livermore says, this is the most important cultural system that anyone intends to do business or travel the world needs to understand. You will get yourself in hot water faster than any other thing, and you and you will offend people faster when you cross this bridge, right? It's the most important thing. And he said it doesn't mean you have to become an expert on the topic. It means you have to stop and ask people how their family is run, try to understand why they're doing things the way they're doing, rather than trying to say, well, you should do it this way or you should do it that way, right? Because we can't understand it all, obviously.
Several months ago, I started to tell Michelle about and I don't know if it was a long read in The Economist or if it was from somewhere else, but a description of wheat versus rice economies. Depending on where in the world you live, one of those will grow and the other probably won't.
Mm-hmm.
And how that can form these systems right here. And in the society that wraps around them. You can do wheat with a big family, right? And as people spread west across this country, a lot of, mom, dad, 6-kid families were raising wheat. Can't raise rice with that. That's not how it works. You've got to have a dozen families, 20 families. Now you can do rice. And if any of them lets down, everybody is negatively impacted. Well, how do you run a society that works that way?
Right.
I want to go do this is not relevant.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's the stupidest thing in the world you can say if you come from that culture. And then, we view that culture from this nuclear family and in this, this particular model, wheat-based culture. Well, I'm going to strike out on my own. And, one of my brothers can marry somebody to come into the family and things are still going to be fine. Okay, maybe that works there, but it flat doesn't work in a rice culture.
Right.
And that was the thesis of this, of this article. But it maps really nicely to these kinship structures you put out here, I think.
Right. And in many cultures, kinship cultures, by the way, kinship cultures are the most prominent around the world.
Sure.
Even who you marry is important, right? Because sometimes marriages are based on how it elevates the family or benefits the family, rather than whether you love that person or not. They tell you can figure out how to love them, but we need them in this family for this reason. So your number is up. So step up, right? And in the nuclear side, on the right-hand side, the Western side, that would be preposterous. The child would walk out and says, I ain't doing that. And then this concept of the patriarch or the matriarch of the family, right? That even if they're not there, right? Even if that family has people living in the United States, they're called back home to get advice, to make decisions. Doesn't matter whether you're 10,000 miles away, it's irrelevant. The patriarch runs the family, or the matriarch, and you respect the authority. No matter if you're an astronaut on the space station, you still respect the authority. Right? It's something that in the Western culture you know, because they're saying here that families are mostly one or two generations, right? The parents, their children, and the people who they're married, and maybe the grandparent. So, and then you get into the economics of families, right? The sense of responsibility back to your family. Let me see. I was letting Tamina in. So that sense of responsibility back to the family is very important, and family economics. You hear lots of stuff in the United States about repatriation, money repatriated back to countries. And I don't know if you understand that concept or not, but it's basically the people who are here, who are working, or in here or Europe, who are working, sending money back home to support their family. Even if it costs them here, where they can live and the things they can do, that sense of responsibility back to the family is very, very high. Any more comments about that? Go ahead, Gary. Hang on.
Yeah, Denise, a lady from India, and they got married a couple about last year and then moved here. They both work in IT, so they make really good money. But the family has the expectation that they should be able to give them money when they need it. And if people want to come visit, that they should be willing to pay for them for the flights to come over. And she said that they finally had to say, and to the people in India, they felt like they are flush and making lots of money and should have plenty of money to do all this. But she had to explain to them that with the cost of living and other expenses here, that they didn't have a lot of disposable income to be able to do that. And so that's been a big adjustment.
Yep. Legal and political systems, you know, those, that's just the formal versus the informal system. One of the examples he used in the book in the informal system was an example that that he observed. I can't remember the page, but basically this person did something that was basically illegal, but because of the position, the argument was that we can't prosecute that person because of their position. If a lower person in the company had done it, they would be prosecuted, but not this person based on their position. Right? It would be too disruptive to the organization or to the country to have that be brought out. Something which we would consider to be preposterous.
Well, we'd consider it to be, but the history is a little different. I mean,
yes.
Go back a ways, so I'm not talking about current politics, rail barons, and what happened with the allocation of land to those individuals based on their access to, you know, senior administration officials of the time, let alone whose land they were tromping across. It wasn't empty, let alone all of that. Just the basic laws of the, you know, former colonial, now United States government were violated all the way through the how land was dispersed for building the rails. It was, again, preposterous, but it was done, and those rights of way still exist.
Right.
And it's, you know, so there it is. If you want to look at the history, go walk on any part of any major railway, and there's violations of laws from that time that just became the law. Well, we're going to do it this way, so that's the law now. And so it's one of the fun things is the people who say they've got that thing on the left have a lot of what's on the right.
Yes. Yeah. That's why you got to be careful judging those other people.
Yeah, the people on the right, at least they kind of tell the truth about
Yeah.
what's going on.
That's a good way to look at it. They admit it, right?
Well, and there's in those environments, there's frequently enough social pressure that works.
Mm-hmm.
We've discovered in the last several years that that's kind of how our government works, is on that thing on the right. What the Constitution says and what the practices aren't really codified with, and this is a law, it's blah, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
in the civil code, and if you violate it, these are the penalties. None of that exists. It's just people will follow these rules, obviously.
Right.
So the foundations of our country in terms of how it actually functions, how the government functions, is on the right-hand side of this diagram, not the left. We just used to think it was on the left.
So listen to this example, right? Malaysia, an Islamic state, has different standards for its indigenous Malay citizens than it does for citizens of Chinese or Indian descent. One US company operating in Kuala Lumpur began offering yoga classes for employees during lunch hour. The class was led by a North American instructor as a way to offer employees holistic exercise, right? So that's an issue right there, right? A North American going into Malaysia to teach yoga, but
there are so many layers in that.
Yeah. So here's the rest of it. There was enthusiastic participation for several of the Indian and Chinese personnel, but no Malay, the predominant population in the country, ever came to yoga. Eventually, the company learned that it was illegal for Malays to practice yoga because yoga is believed to incorporate elements of Hinduism, which could corrupt a Muslim's faith. Right. So there's layer upon layer upon layer of legal system, right? Complete understanding of all the aspects of legal structure is not necessary, but an appreciation for the significance of how a legal system affects the way we work in different contexts is essential. Okay, okay, hang on. Tamina, you're not even showing up on my screen. Go ahead.
Mute myself. There you go. So there's only 5 people on this. You don't have to mute everyone. We can use the button ourselves. So here's it's interesting with the informal and formal system currently. Even right now, today I was on a call this afternoon with kind of the statewide food distribution system, and one of the things that's happening, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the EBT program or the Fresh Bucks or the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. Old timers used to call it food stamps. With the recent public charge issues that have come up, that if you access those who are wanting to become who have green cards, want to become citizens, or even that pathway, that if you have accessed, if you're considered a public charge, if you've accessed 30 months or 12 consecutive months of any public benefit. So if you access 2 things at the same time, it counts double. During this pandemic, part of the background of this, and that's been a huge thing, that's a new thing that went into place February 24th, caused a lot of fear among people who could really use help during the pandemic. They have come up with pandemic EBT. So people who would qualify for food benefits that normally would not, have any need for it. This is like on an emergency basis. People are so afraid of that whole idea of public charge that those who would qualify for it, it would make their life easier, are not accessing it just because of kind of this informal, the idea of what it would do to them in the long run. especially among the immigrant communities. And so there's a lot of like what may be written or may not be written, and then what is understood or what people feel is binding can be often detrimental. So how people interpret things and how certain populations see certain things through a particular filter and how it affects them.
Yeah. So that gets us onto a formal system that has now a bunch of informal aspects to it. So the next one is religious systems. And this one took a little bit of reading at first, but basically he's dividing them into rational and mystical. One of the challenges here, I think, is that if you talk to most North Americans, they don't believe that their faith is reason-based scientific answers, right, to supernatural with a focus on individual responsibility. Right. I think a lot of people find themselves, if you were to talk to them, they would find themselves thinking they're somewhere between rational and mystical, right? Is that what you think? Was that what you think? Anybody has any comments on this one? Come on, Michelle. I know you do.
Michelle probably has better ones than I do.
I know she does. She's being quiet tonight.
Well, oh, what did I do?
I got you. We have you. You just muted yourself. Oh, there's Tamina. You were unmuted. Now you're muted.
Oh, okay. Let me think that over again for just a second, because
Okay.
I messed up my screen all funny and then lost track of what I was thinking. I don't have a lot of thoughts about religion broken down the way that we see it there.
Right. Yeah.
I do think it's a really interesting and valuable challenge to approach religion through the same lens that we're approaching the rest of culture, which is with respect and not superiority. Ultimately, do I believe that our God is supreme and better than everything in this whole entire world? Yes. But when you approach literally anyone else with a different belief, and that's the approach that you take, let me just tell you why my God is so much better than everything that you've ever been raised with. That rarely works. That is almost never successful. And to just allow a shift in your brain that says that my religion or my way of practicing religion may not actually be better than yours, or there is some validity to what you are thinking, or there is value in your way of thought. It can be expansive almost to the way that we view each other, and even the way that we practice and worship as well, if that makes sense. That was kind of hard for me. I kind of circled around that for a little bit, but
Yeah, I think sometimes
it's just a challenge.
People mistake respecting each other's religion and beliefs and value systems as accepting it. Right? So we've got to tell you about ours because, you know, we're Christian and we believe our God is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and yours is just a God with a small g, so you got to convert. Is one thing, you know, but that's not what we're talking about here, right? In terms of cultural intelligence, is being able to respect and to understand that
Right.
other people have other beliefs, they have different value systems, they've been brought up in different ways. And not only is it good to respect it, but it's probably good to get to know it, become educated and intelligent and learn about other things. Rather than just saying, I don't need to know anything about that. If it's not Christianity, it's wrong. So, you know.
Or even within our church, with the global Christian church, denominationally, like I was not raised speaking in tongues, and I thought that everybody who does is totally crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have really strong feelings about that. Or snake charming. If I go to the Appalachian Mountains and somebody throws a snake at me, I will scream and I will run and maybe die. But so that's an extreme example. But even within the Christian church, understanding that maybe the way that I was raised isn't the only way that matters or the only way that has value. I mean, for instance, my dad was a pastor, if you didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then he was a fugitive, and then he was an inmate, and now I have no idea where he is. So my upbringing, when it comes to like my roots in the Nazarene church, are like as unique as they come. So that I could, if I based everything about God off of my dad, what a mistake that would be. Just saying that even within our culture, there's a lot to pay attention to and to learn from.
I get a lot from Twitter, and it's quite diverse, even though I cultivate my feed pretty tightly. So I've got folks who identify as atheists, and a range of atheist sensibilities coming into that feed. Oh, my son's waving at me, wants to remind me that he identifies as atheist. And then I've got people on the Baptist spectrum of things in with some views that are a bit different than what I'm notionally comfortable with, and some people from the Anglican Catholic tradition speaking in over here. And it, oh my gosh, it's actually easier to deal with Islam and Buddhism because I have some familiarity with those than it is to deal with these variations on what is notionally my faith that I have to think about. Became pretty good friends with a coworker in my, late 20s, I guess, who was an evangelical Catholic. Now that's an interesting thing to absorb when you've been raised Nazarene all your life and gotten those what's his name tracts that show you all the evils that Catholics practice historically and still do, which were all made up by the guy who published them, by the way. So here's this guy who is a devout Catholic who believes in a personal relationship with Jesus, but yet the sacraments are critical. Oh, okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah. I'm trying to unmute everybody and let you guys mute yourselves.
Mute again.
Huh?
I muted myself and then it said I could not unmute. I had an observation. There's a
Grantley took a little control and now he can't let go of it.
concept that I read about. I think it might be from C.S. Lewis, but he talks search for God or religion. There's a hall, and the people that are God seekers are in the hallway. There's doors might be Christianity or Islam, and we actually have more in common with those who have sought to come in to the building and are seeking God than we do with those who totally have nothing to do with God. Not many times to put all our focus on people who have no interest in God or outside the church and see them as being legitimate and targets for evangelism, and we and antagonism towards people that are in the building seeking after God because they happen not to have chosen to go through the door that we went through or we were born into.
Mm.
You broke up a lot of there, Gary, but that end of it is something I want to say I believe it. I say I've observed it.
Right.
Yeah.
My whole life, literally.
Are you waving your hand, Michelle?
Oh, no, I was
Okay.
flipping the screen so I could see John talking.
Okay. So yeah, this is an interesting one, right? We could spend a lot of time on this, but when you get into that statement that he made, also you can see how the capitalist system has been worked into the Protestant Christian ethic, right? And some of
I
the
have
things.
really harsh thoughts on that. And that's probably all I should say.
But how many people do you think in any church, right? You can use our church or any church, even realize that influence in what they're considered to be right and biblical and true, and how they look at other people and treat other people, right?
I think it broke the nation, and I think it broke religion and the Christianity in the nation, bluntly. I think the Protestant work ethic is based on a brutal misreading of Scripture, followed by gaming what everybody would think of you. I have to work hard to show that I am one of the very few elect that will ever go to heaven because I'm a Calvinist.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So it's not even pure Calvinism, it's gaming to demonstrate that I am one of Calvin's elect. And bluntly, I mean, I'll allow Catholicism, I'll allow holy rollers and all these other things, but to me, that's heresy.
Mm-hmm.
This notion that there's only a few thousand of us ever going to make it to heaven doesn't work for me.
Right.
So then that heresy tainted Christianity in this country by lining up Christian faith with working like a dog to become wealthy, which Jesus really said don't.
Right.
I mean, there are even Proverbs, but Jesus himself just said, yeah, no, don't.
Yeah.
Consider the lilies, and and on and on. So to now, to the point that became the religion. I mean, it's overtaken Christianity as the religion of our country fundamentally.
Yeah, that's
And
what I was saying. Some people don't realize that how much that has been interwoven into many things.
Yes. So
I honestly
I'm cranky about that all the time. Sorry.
I didn't know until like 2 years ago that the Bible doesn't say God helps those who help themselves. I have heard that so often in my life that I called my mom one day. I was talking to one of my stepsisters and I was like, Mom, where in the Bible does it say God helps those who help themselves? She's like, nowhere. That's not a thing. And I was like, that's not a verse. That's not like you have to, like, she's like, you can't outwork God. You can trust him. You can pray for it, but you don't have to prove how hard you're trying to hit. That's not the way if that makes sense. Like, yeah. I didn't know that. I literally thought, I think I was probably a teenager when I found out that cleanliness is not next to godliness. I thought that was in the Bible too.
That's
I mean,
from the
I
19th.
figured it out eventually.
Yeah. I think that's the 19th century when they were trying to get people to take baths and not carry diseases to each other.
Yeah.
Well,
like
there's a
to-
lot
like-
of Shakespearean quotes that people think are biblical.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Shakespeare wrote like a third of the New Testament, apparently, and big chunks of Proverbs.
You know, when we were going over to the other side, the mystical, the Islamic side, when we were in Montreal for a wedding, it wasn't Montreal, it was Toronto for a wedding. We were with Tamina's family, and I was talking to one of her uncles at his house. Not the house where the wedding was, but the other uncle that where your sister was staying.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I were just talking. I don't remember where you other guys were. We were just talking. And he was telling me how expensive it is to live in Canada when everybody thinks it's so great. And the tax rates are very, very high in order to get the medical care that everybody thinks is great, that we just found out is not always that great. And he was saying it's really difficult to live here. And people don't always realize it. And then he was telling me about buying this house because they live in a pretty nice neighborhood. I mean, it was like, you know, a suburban neighborhood. And he was saying, I was asking, well, how much does a house cost here and how do you get a house? He says, well, it's really difficult to get a house here. And he said for most Muslims, the only way they can buy a house is by going through an Islamic bank. And I said, what do you mean? I didn't realize he was talking about a true Islamic bank, not a bank owned by Muslims in New York City. A true Islamic bank. He's a practicing Muslim. He says, well, in our religion, a true Muslim doesn't charge other Muslims interest on loans. So when we want to buy a house, we save our money up and we can go to the Islamic bank and they will help us buy our house, and we can afford it because the interest is not accumulating like it does with a regular mortgage. And I never even thought that was possible. So he explained to me how all of this worked. And so when I saw this in the book, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what he was talking about. But in our culture, I don't care if a bank is owned by Billy Graham and Franklin Graham, you're not going to get a mortgage without interest. I'm sorry, because most Americans don't separate that. That's how the capitalist work ethic and system is built into our system. Right? So that was very educational for me to learn from him. And he taught me a few more things when I was talking to him, but that was the one that stood out the most. That's how he was able to afford his house.
That's also because he's Haji. It wouldn't
Right.
work for every Muslim.
Right. So in that branch of Islam,
No. He completed Hajj.
Right.
So if you think about how much interest is charged on a house loan, what would it be like if we could get a mortgage without 29 years of interest?
It's pretty substantial.
Yeah. Right. So anyhow, so those are interesting things, right? I'm glad that you guys are seeing this and this is making sense to you. So this is where that one ended. Then let's see where I am here now. So if you don't have any more questions there, I'll just begin this and we can end it because I want you guys to think about this, right, as we go into the next section. The next section, we're going to go into those 10 cultural value dimensions, which are really powerful. And then there's 10 different, he has divided the world into 10 different cultural groups. And I wish you had the book that you could read these groups. And I'm trying to figure out how to share them simultaneously. I'm thinking about maybe I'll try to share them simultaneously with some of the different groups. But it's really, really interesting how when we get into that, these cultural clusters. But before we do that, I wanted you to continue to looking at the Bible on culture in the Bible. So one of the books that I just read is First and Second Thessalonians. I want to show you this slide first. I found this slide first. Remember when we were talking about the book of Acts in Acts chapter 2 and all of those countries that were mentioned? Remember when we wrote it on the board? But I found this map that I don't know if you find this interesting, but look at how broad the representation of people were in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. Right. And if you look at that and you look at Paul's missionary journeys, you know, you have those Bibles and those maps in the back of your Bible. You can see how the church spread after Acts chapter 2 and 3 and 4, going into these very regions where those people were from. You're muted, Gary. You're muted.
You might have to unmute him again.
But he told me, yeah, he told me he was controlling. Go ahead. You okay? Yeah. So I just thought this was interesting as I began to look at this and look at the different places. And you can see on the left-hand side, the legend says, these are all the places from Acts chapter 2, verse 9 and 11, where mentioned in 2, 9 to 11, where they were Jewish. Some of them were Jewish cities, and some of these were those communities. God knows what he's doing. The Holy Spirit knows what he's doing when he does things, right? So let's look at this one here. If you look at Thessalonica is up in the top left-hand corner. And you see here that the gospel now is crossing over. I think this is the Aegean Sea in here. That now is crossing over to what is called Macedonia and Achaia. And does anybody know what the modern name for Achaia is?
Well, that's all Greece in there now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all Greece.
Yeah.
So when Paul saw that vision of come over to Macedonia, right, that was the invitation to bring the gospel into Europe. And we know how powerful the Greek influence has been on the world, right? Even today, the Greek influence on the world is still phenomenally strong. Well, the language Greek, the Bible was written in Greek. These people didn't even speak Greek when Jesus was with Jesus. Now we have large portions of the Bible written in Greek. If you look at Thessalonica and where it's located, I want you to go and do some research on this. There's something unique about Thessalonica in the world, and I want you to try to find out what that is, unless one of you geography buffs know it right now. But there's something about it that's unique, and it was a very influential city.
I wouldn't worry about it.
And you can see a lot of these other cities then that Paul is talking about. Corinth is down here. You get to Athens, you have Crete. So you see how it's beginning to trend there. So as you read the book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, there's not a lot of controversy in it like there is in Galatians, but you can still see the cultural aspects of the things that the people were dealing with in Thessalonica and that region that was called Macedonia. Then we talk about that more next week. So they're the questions for your study. What's unique about Thessalonica and its unique place in history? What are some of the cultural influences you see from reading there. There's some great resources online as well. If you don't have all of these different Bibles that I have, if you have access to Logos, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there as well. But if you didn't go to seminary or you didn't go to a Bible school, a Christian school, you probably didn't buy Logos. And then what was the persecution that in First Thessalonians, Paul talks a lot about persecution. What was the persecution that they were suffering, and why were they suffering it? So then from here, we'll go into these 10 different cultural values, cultural value dimensions. And you see that they build heavily on the cultural influences that we were just talking about. Individualism versus collectivism, the power distance structures, uncertainty avoidance, strong in many cultures, you know that, cooperative versus competitive, short-term versus long-term thinking, contextualized thinking, the importance of being rather than doing. That's a huge North American and international conflict, right? Church needs to last for 90 minutes on the doing side. On the being side, church lasts until we're done. Right? The universalism versus particularism, neutral versus effective, and monochromatic thinking versus polychromatic thinking. So we get into those 10 dimensions. Is this a good place to stop? All right. So your homework for is look at Thessalonians, do some research on that, and then try to answer these 3 questions. And then next week, you want to do this again next week? Is this valuable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll set up again for next week, and thank you for coming. Any questions, comments, any prayer requests from anyone?
I mean, the obvious, like, well, it's, I think I'm just going to preface this by saying it feels selfish in a way to ask for prayer when we're all going through the same thing. So that's why I said the obvious. But for instance, I have been out of work since the bars and restaurants closed. Aaron is still working, and Aaron is my partner, and he has a compromised immune system. He has diabetes and asthma and various pretty severe allergies, and really his type 1 diabetes alone is enough to make this a pretty significant threat for him. And what he works in Bellevue, and the greater number of land area, except that they're getting hauled down here, but that's beside the point. So I think while you are praying for peace and guidance of the Holy Spirit, you can include us in that, because it's the tension of, risk is there, and also learning how to homeschool is a blessing and a challenge. It's awesome because I love my kid. He's like the best, but we weren't expecting homeschooling, and he's in 5th grade, so he was expecting 5th grade camp and 5th grade graduation and the excitement of moving on to middle school with all his friends, and now that's all gone. And I'm not complaining, because we are so lucky. The Auburn School District has been handling everything so well with plans. Like lesson plans daily and weekly, and communication from the teachers and daily meetings with the teachers. And they even sent home Chromebooks and hotspots. Like, we didn't have a computer and we didn't have Wi-Fi, but now Thaddeus has access to everything that he needs because the school district supplied it. And so I'm certainly not complaining. It is, under the circumstances, absolutely as good as it could be. I'm very, very thankful. But of course, that it doesn't come without its challenges, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of work does Aaron do?
So he works for Rico, the
Copiers?
that's the one.
Okay.
He is contracted to Symetra in Bellevue. Symetra itself has been closed down as a building since way back when everything first began. And so the workload that they have been putting on the Rico employees, who would be literally in that entire giant mirror building in downtown Bellevue, there are 11 employees keeping that entire business running. And it has been pulling like 12 and 13-hour days for a while now as well, with the commute. All of the commute is so much easier. So, silver linings.
You're muted, honey. I didn't mute. Let's see. You're unmuted.
So Michelle, you don't have to apologize to ask for prayer. That's what it sounds like. We are in this together, but it affects us differently, and God knows that. And no matter, there are those who are suffering a lot more. There's not a relativity to prayer, So I want you not to feel like you can't ask for that, because somewhere it's like that, talking about people in China not getting enough to eat or something. It doesn't matter. What you need is what you need, and what you're going through. God knows those things, and we can pray about those. It's not relative to some other suffering. I would like some prayer because I'm really tired today, but I would like to. I'm doing kind of my current work, but since I've taken on addressing some food access issues, it is broader in scope than what I initially thought I was walking into, politically and equity and system-wise. I've taken on a broader range of that, and so I would like prayer for that, so I stay healthy and I can keep doing the things that I've been called to do during this time that I feel like I can do.
Michelle, we'll add you to our prayer list as well. So,
Thank you.
would anyone like to lead us in prayer?
Sure.
Go ahead, John.
Father, thank you for the folks that are gathered here and at distance from each other, but nevertheless gathered. Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for Grantley's leadership. Thank you for the grace that you have poured into each of these people. And Lord, we lift the requests to you. Tamina's just way more than what I know she expected workload here in this situation of trying to secure food for people who need it, and the various hurdles. And Lord, we know you know what those are, and we know you have the ways. And we just pray that you put those in front of her, and meanwhile give her peace and confidence that you've got this, and she has to walk the path with you, which we know to be scriptural. And likewise, Lord, we ask your particular blessing upon Michelle's family and the stresses that they have.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
it's I love how Tamina said it, that for everybody it's something different. For some of us it's just isolation, and for some of us it's isolation and way too much not isolation. And everybody has something different, Lord, and for each of us, just to pray the grace that we need in this time. And then, Lord, we gathered here for a particular purpose and a particular reason, and we ask that you bless what we talked about today in a way that will cause it to sink into not merely our minds, but our hearts, that will persist in our thinking and in our feeling as we come to meet and interact with people, not just right away, but in coming weeks and months and years, where these principles and their working out become a part of our lives, so that we show your face to those we meet, regardless of what their culture, their background, their ways of being are that are foreign to us. These gifts you put before us, Lord, of the tools to begin to understand how to relate respectfully and genuinely to people from very different cultural backgrounds is tremendous, Lord. And we thank you for those gifts, and we ask that you cause them to sink deep within us. Lord, I pray that you'll keep us all in your care until we meet again on Sunday and again next week. Thank you for all of these people, Lord, and bless us in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for coming. And thank you for your time, your effort, and I hope you have a great week. And I'll see you again on. You may see me on Sunday. I'll try to see you on Sunday. And then we'll see you next Wednesday. Next Wednesday night. Have a good evening. Bye.
Grantley.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.